Right, that's the decision at the Bloemfontein High Court. Judgment is reserved in this matter that has been argued this morning, and that judgment will come out on the 18th of July. If I heard correctly there, 18th July, that means next Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning. That's when the judgment is going to be made known. And so what was being argued there today is Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's legal team making a case for why they should be given the right to appeal the decisions court, or the decision that was made by that court. And the counter argument is that there are no reasonable prospects of success on appeal. Well, what are the issues? The person who's best placed to talk to us about this is Mnisi, who is with me in studio. We've been listening together to those arguments, Linda. And let's start with the argument that is being made by Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's legal team. And they are arguing strongly on this consent that is alleged to have been obtained by South African authorities in Tanzania to say, well, you said you wanted to come home, and so you were assisted to go back home. But they are saying that you cannot consent on illegality. Just take us through what actually is going on here.
Absolutely, Claudia. And it's actually one of the reasons that they listed in this application for leave to appeal as a compelling reason, one of the compelling reasons as to why there are prospects of success. You'll remember that the court, this same court, Judge Philip Lobser, ruled that in fact this was indeed an extradition disguised as a deportation. And in that particular instance, in extradition, what you would need is consent, because the person would need to be fully aware of what will happen once they get to the receiving state. In this case, Dr. Nandipha Magudumana, the court found that she was well aware that coming to South Africa, you would face criminal charges. But she challenged all of that, saying, I did not consent. I was in fact abducted from Tanzania, brought back to South Africa. And one of the contentious issues there is that type of consent. When, was it made? Who was it made to? And was it even in writing? That's what Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's lawyers are arguing here.
All right, let's pick up on that point. Consent. Who was it made to? So there are two departments that are involved. It's Home Affairs and the police. Yeah. What was the role of the South African police services there? Because there is some talk of they were merely providing protection. Absolutely. It brings about that particular question of the role that was played. And what Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's lawyers are arguing here is that there are two conflicting statements from the respondents. And it needs to be clear, because in their papers, what they told this court was that the Home Affairs Department was there for the purposes of arranging, of course, the deportation back to South Africa, which the SAPS said we were never involved in. But you'll also remember that in the papers of the SAPS, that is where the issue around consent is found. It's not in the Home Affairs papers, it is in the SAPS papers, where it is said that she said all and sundry that she wants to come back to her children in South Africa. And that is what they're arguing, to say the roles here also need to be distinguished, because, the importance of the consent and who it was made to. Was it made to Home Affairs officials? And who is that official that consent was made to? Because the officials who were involved in this process from the Home Affairs Department did depose affidavits to the court. So SAPS is now saying that the role they played there in Tanzania was peripheral. The arresting party, the party that performed the arrest, according to Magudumana's lawyer, was Home Affairs. Is Home Affairs sticking by that?
You'll remember that Home Affairs said it was not involved in the process of, arresting. It had not gone there for the purposes of bringing Nandipha Magudumana back into the country, for the purposes of prosecution.
Right.
Right? Because that then would mean that it was well aware of the fact that this would require extradition, and the proper processes there would have to be followed. So, in fact, it makes it quite interesting because during the application itself, this was discussed, the role that each individual department played. And there was a big question, Kole, around the presence of the Director of Public Prosecutions, or the person from the NPA in Tanzania. You knew very well that you wanted to bring Nandipha Magudumana back to South Africa for prosecution. That was the argument that was made by Dr. Nandipha Magudumana as lawyers, saying that the mere presence of a person from the public prosecutions, from the NPA rather, did indicate that it was for the purposes of prosecuting her. And the Home Affairs said, no, we were doing what was required of us in deporting Nandipha Magudumana, but the court found that, in fact, you extradited her, and that required you to follow the extradition processes, and therefore that essentially was unlawful. And that is what Dr. Nandipha Magudumana in this particular case is using, to say, I couldn't have consented to an unlawful process. His lawyers now in court arguing that by virtue of the fact that it was found to be unlawful, then sort of nullifies the entire process.
Yeah. Linda, then there is another lawyer there, and you and I assumed that he is arguing on behalf of Home Affairs, and the understanding is that Home Affairs has withdrawn from this matter, but he comes with a very interesting question to say, what was this illegality that was consented to? Are we able to answer that?
The illegality that was, consented to, you'll remember this is now in the context of the extradition itself. By virtue of the court finding that, this entire process was an extradition disguised as a deportation, that alone, according to Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's lawyer, says this was illegal. Therefore, the consent that was required for an extradition wasn't properly sought. And if it was, who was it made to? Who is the official? When was it made? And was it in writing? Provide us with that consent as required by this process. You'll remember there was, of course, reliance on authority when the court made the decision to dismiss Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's application, and this is what was discussed in this particular matter, the case of State versus Mahala and others of 1994. And there, that case was dealing particularly with the transportation of Muhammad, who was brought into a different country. And what there was the issue of contention was that, he needed to be sent to the United States, and there he would receive a death penalty. And in this case, the court ruled that what needed to happen was that proper consent needed to be acquired. It is one of the requirements that is needed because, of course, there is the issue around prosecution that would have to unfold thereafter.
So let's look ahead, therefore. If Dr. Magudumana argues successfully at the High Court in Bloemfontein, and the argument, remember, has to do with her being given leave to appeal to another court the decision of the court to dismiss her initial application around her arresting in Tanzania. That means this matter is going to now move to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Do I have it correct?
Yes. If this particular court that's hearing the leave to appeal application grants her the leave to appeal, she will then head to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and there she will ask for that court to overturn the decision that was made by the Bloemfontein High Court, essentially saying, give me what I've asked for. And once that is done, and if she succeeds in persuading that particular court to rule in her favor, it would mean that she would be discharged. If she persuades based on what she wants, she would be released based on the findings that it would have made, obviously. But of course, there are varying views around this application, and a number of authorities that are relied on. You would have heard the case of December and Mahala, and the arguments there are that, those authorities were made before the Constitution Constitution of South Africa. And here, we're dealing with issues of constitutionality. If the Constitution of South Africa says deporting someone or extraditing someone under the guise of deportation is unlawful, then it should at least follow that that particular process shouldn't have happened that way.
If unsuccessful at the Supreme Court of Appeal, you and I are now pontificating over whether she succeeds or she doesn't succeed. So in the instance that she doesn't succeed at the SCA, might we see this going to the Concord?
It looks like it, at least from this point onward. It hasn't been officially stated, but it looks like it's something that may end up at the Constitutional Court because, of course, we've heard the word constitution being thrown around quite a number of times, and which court is better placed to deal with issues of constitutionality? The apex court of South Africa. So it's likely to end up there. And this is while, of course, the other matter, the main matter, is still in court.
And therefore, I want to round off the conversation to say, if the matter may possibly, and again, we have to be clear to the viewers, if you're just joining us, we're discussing this particular matter, and it's got to do with Dr. Nandipha Magudumana arguing that the manner in which she was brought back to South Africa from Tanzania was illegal or perhaps unlawful. It was an extradition disguised as deportation. Linda, let's conclude on this point. Dr. Magudumana, it would seem, she still has on retainer high-powered lawyers. Does she have money to afford these people?
That's an interesting question, Polly, because then we'd have to know what's in her bank accounts. But if you look at her legal team, it has sparked a lot of debate, especially when she made this application, showing up in court with Advocate Anton Katz. That and on its own really did, bring about a lot of questions around whether she's got the money to go to court. At this particular point, it looks like she has, chosen her legal team who seems to have experience in dealing with matters of international law as well as, our law in South Africa.
Linda Mnisi, thank you very much for putting us in the picture there.